Moving abroad or traveling is essentially just throwing yourself into the deep end of life. It's thrilling, messy, a little bit terrifying. And recently I've been reading Florence Given's new book, Women Living Deliciously, and Miranda Hart's new book, I Haven't Been Entirely Honest with You. Today I wanted to dive into lessons in both of these women's books that can help you not only survive but thrive, whether you're traveling, moving abroad, or in everyday life. Reading both of these women's books back to back was very interesting for me, and this is in no way me trying to advertise the books necessarily. I just think they're really, really good books, and I do recommend reading them just in general. I want to talk today about embracing fear, overcoming fear, gaining confidence, laughing at the awkward chaos, and even talk about how challenging societal norms can be even more fun in a foreign country. Let's get on with the episode. First topic is talking about overcoming fear. I feel like fear doesn't go away when you book a flight. I feel like it actually gets stronger, it gets worse. I feel like the reality can kind of hit you that maybe you're traveling or moving or you're doing something different. I feel like that becomes the point where you can start to overthink things like, how am I going to make friends? Am I going to get lost? Am I going to get kidnapped? There are going to be language barriers. Am I doing the right trip for me? Like, the time Sam and I landed in Colombia was an extremely overwhelming and quite scary experience. This was the part of the trip that we were starting where we had zero plans. I had no clue what the route was going to be, neither did Sam. We had no clue. All we needed to do was get to Chile, and that's pretty much all we knew. There was nothing else on the agenda, but there were things like, we know we want to go do Machu Picchu and we want to do the Bolivia salt flats, but apart from that, zero clue. And I feel like South America is so much harder to navigate because it's such a bigger landscape that you could go in any direction, and everybody has different routes that they recommend based on their preferences, and you're trying to navigate, okay, but what would be right for me? Relying on outside sources like that can be really scary because they're recommending things based on their recommendations, but you don't know if that's necessarily going to suit you and your trip. Florence kind of talks about this in her book and how fear can be this thing that stops you from living deliciously or truthfully. And I feel like it's so true. Once Sam and I accepted that we had no clue what we were doing or where we were going, we kind of just got into this routine of being a bit more relaxed, embracing that fear. We would do bits of research here and there to give us an idea of what might be best for us. But eventually we just worked it out. And I feel like that's what fear is kind of stimulating you to do. You just have to figure shit out because there's no one coming to get you. There's no one that's going to necessarily sort out your problem or your worries. You just kind of work through it. And then when you come out the other side, you feel so proud of yourself and you can really embrace what you've achieved. Like, even in Miranda's book, there was a chapter or a little segment which I loved, just talking about embracing the awkward chaos and how the awkward moments are actually the parts that lead you to growth. And I feel like that's so, so true. And we definitely lived that out, because any time where we were feeling awkward or insecure in our travels or didn't know what we were doing, felt quite stumbly, is the best way I can put it. It's now become a point where we feel like we really achieved something, and we're really, really proud of those times where we sorted ourselves out, even when we were stressed as hell. From reading both of these women's books, I've kind of been able to understand a bit more that fear just kind of seems to be this speed bump rather than this mountain that you can't climb or hike over, or whatever metaphor you want to use. Fear is just that little stepping stone, maybe, if anything, to get you to where you want to be and to become a much more resilient, stronger individual. This is where gaining confidence comes into play. When you're navigating a foreign country, there is no choice but to figure things out. And you gain confidence in moments that maybe you're not even recognizing. Things like negotiating in a market, or saying hi to a stranger at a hostel, trying to speak the native language in the country you're in. You might even end up traveling with strangers that you met in a hostel or something. It's just like these small things, I feel, that can really build your confidence that you're not aware of, but once you've done it, you realize, oh, I could do that again. That was so easy. Also, when you put yourself out of your comfort zone, I feel like you gain so much confidence as well. For example, when Sam and I were in Huacachina in Peru, it's an oasis in the middle of the sand desert, and Everybody goes there to do sandboarding, dune buggy, riding, all of this stuff. So out of my comfort zone, not something I ever would have picked to do. And to be fair, I only went because I had no clue what it was. If I'd known, I probably wouldn't have done it, put it that way. I feel like I'm one of those people where if you don't tell me what's going to happen, then I can go and have a good time because I have no expectations. But once I have expectations, I'm like spiral. But it was so out of my comfort zone. We were riding in these unstable dune buggies all around these sand dunes, going headfirst down sand dunes that were really, really steep. But I absolutely loved it. And genuinely, not to brag, when I came out of it, I felt on top of the world. I felt so confident in myself and so proud of myself because that's something I never ever would have done before. And I guess that's just kind of embracing the fear and gaining that confidence afterwards to go, you know what, I probably could do that again. And actually, it's not that scary to try new things. Or even when you're trying different foods in different countries, like when I tried new food in Colombia and Venezuela, this was food I'd never had before at home. And that was quite overwhelming because I'm not necessarily a picky eater, but it becomes a lot of different foods that your body is trying to adjust to. But being out of your comfort zone could even be having your first meal at a hostel by yourself. Maybe you just want to sit by yourself and you don't want to talk to everyone. Maybe you've never eaten alone before. It could even be having a shower in a shared bathroom, gaining the confidence to just go, no, I'm going to get my towel, I'm going to take up this space, and I'm going to have a really nice shower. Moving to a new country, talking to strangers and making friends. Honestly, everything can be so overwhelming and so scary. But once you take ownership and don't worry about the screw-ups or the awkwardness, something that both these women talk about in their books, you'll feel so empowered, and I feel like it will give you that confidence to deep dive into the next thing that maybe you were previously anxious about. Also, one thing to note is that no one cares about your awkwardness or you sitting alone or you not talking to anyone. What I found being in hostels especially, or just being a traveler in general, or when you've moved to a new country, moving to Australia, for example, everybody's in the same boat. And if they're not in that same boat, they completely understand where you're coming from because maybe they've been in that position previously. Like you might meet some people in a hostel that have done a solo trip and you're doing your first one and they might go, I'm not feeling that way right now particularly, but I understand where you're coming from because I did it before. And it can be really scary. Everyone is being weird. Everyone is feeling a bit insecure. This might be the first time a lot of people have left home as well, being in a hostel, or even I found moving to Australia. This is the first time people have done this. They've never lived away from home like this before. And everybody can understand how the other feels, or if not, find something in themselves that relates to that feeling. And then once you've mastered that feeling of embracing the awkwardness or embracing the fear and doing it anyway, I feel like you can bring those skills back to your everyday life. Or if you're moving to a new country, you can apply these skills to your everyday life. This could be in a job interview or having to speak to a stranger in a bar, going out there, making new friends, or even just enjoying a nice walk by yourself, taking yourself out on like a picnic date. I guess from what I took from the two women's books that I've read is it's quite nice to kind of date yourself in a way, even if you're in a relationship. It's really nice to just do things for yourself and take everything at your own pace. Like I say, taking yourself on a picnic date. That might be your form of self-love for the day or for the week or the month or whatever you feel comfortable with. You might go out and get your favorite snack from the shop and then come home and eat it whilst you watch your favorite TV show. Or you might want to go and read in the park. Maybe you're reading a really good book and you want to be out in nature. Once you find the key to your confidence, it becomes so thrilling. I would say it also allows you to become vulnerable with people, which can be really overwhelming, really terrifying, and quite scary in some cases. And I'm thinking of scenarios when you're traveling, like admitting that you're lost, or you need help with directions, or you don't know which bus to get on. Those kind of situations where you have no idea what's going on, but you feel a bit vulnerable asking for help. Maybe you're somebody who doesn't always want to ask for that help. Or even admitting that you're missing home. I think that's one that we encountered a lot. A lot of people say, this is great what I'm doing right now, but obviously I do miss home. And I've talked about this before, but I'm quite an anxious person. And when I would feel how I was feeling, whether it was just feeling anxious about a situation or feeling a bit unstable with where we're at on our travels because we don't know where we're going next, or if I was missing home, I was very, very lucky to have Sam to talk to about it, and vice versa. Being able to be vulnerable with people is extremely empowering and can absolutely help the situation. It's such a good key to communication, and I think people will really view it as a strength. For example, if you're a solo traveler and you meet some girls or some guys in a hostel and you're having a bit of a down day, sometimes just saying, I'm not feeling great today, I'm feeling really homesick, or I'm just needing to plan some stuff because I'm quite anxious about where I'm going next. People will appreciate that so much more than you being in a mood with them, or you coming off rude, or you coming off like you don't want to be around these people. It's something that Miranda talks about a lot in her book, which I absolutely resonated with and absolutely loved, is finding this confidence to just kind of set those boundaries with people, or not even boundaries sometimes, just like being directly honest with people and not trying to do this whole people pleasing thing so that you're not missing out on certain group activities when in actuality you might not want to be there. It's also really refreshing, I feel, and very comforting to listen to other people who feel very similar to you. I've had people on the podcast and we've ended up talking about stuff after we've recorded an episode, and it's so comforting to say, oh, you're struggling with this, that's so funny because so am I, and how do we navigate this, or do you have any tips, or oh, I have some advice for that because I had that. And I just love that sort of connection that you can have with people, and the way that actually admitting that maybe you're a bit anxious, you're a bit stressed, maybe you're struggling to find a job, maybe you're struggling with where you want to travel to. Talking about it is going to make the problem feel so much smaller, and I really do believe a problem shared is a problem halved. And also, like I've said, bringing these skills back to everyday life. And I know that everyone uses this term that like communication is key, but I honestly believe it really is. I've really found that being vulnerable whilst traveling with whoever or whichever person I talk to, it allowed me to feel so much better after that conversation, whether the person could relate or not. Most people when they're traveling are going to want to listen and going to want to help you if you've become some sort of friends or if you've had a few conversations together. And especially if they're not coming from an emotional place necessarily, they might be able to help you kind of talk your way back into feeling more empowered and feeling a bit more secure and just more confident in general. So one thing I do have to say is don't worry, solo travelers, everybody has your back. Now, sometimes when you're away, you might see things that challenge your traditional societal norms. I guess whatever you deem as normal. I know that we certainly did. Going to countries like Nicaragua and Venezuela were extremely eye-opening. The way that their governments are designed, or even the people's mentality that live there or are from there, have just grown up there and not lived anywhere else. It's really, really interesting to learn about all of the history, but then essentially Sam and I were always very interested in this because it's very different to the UK, obviously. But it's very eye-opening, I will say, and learning about new cultures is so, so fascinating that I don't think you should forget about doing that whilst you're traveling. Obviously, some people's goal during their travels will be to learn about different cultures, but someone else's trip might just be all about partying and meeting new people, which is completely fine. They're two different trips, but is completely fine. I just think that learning about the different cultures that you're entering, more to be respectful, if anything, is so, so fascinating. For example, when Sam and I hiked Machu Picchu, we learned about the importance of spirituality and all of the Incas and the Incan Empire. It really left us wanting to learn more, essentially. Because I feel like in the UK, we have history and it's so fascinating to me. And I love learning about British history, but I feel like spirituality doesn't necessarily come into play with that. And so that's something that Sam and I were not familiar with. And it made it so much more fun to explore that whole other side of history and what was happening in the UK versus what was happening in Peru, for example, or Colombia. Florence's book, Women Living Deliciously, talks a lot about challenging societal norms and questioning these rules that society gives us. I found this really interesting because she talks about being inquisitive and asking why certain things are the way they are, and then figuring out where you place yourself in those scenarios. It changes your perspective on things, especially when you see the society norms of a different culture in a different country. It then kind of led me to start thinking about things like, I'm from London, for example. Why am I rushing around everywhere at home? And for example, moving to Australia, it kind of did overwhelm me a little bit at the idea of getting back to that almost rushing routine, maybe like the fast-paced life, because this is more similar to London, I would say. Even though Australia is typically laid back, for me, it was getting a job, having to go to work, getting a flat, and sorting everything out just felt very fast-paced, when for the past 5-6 months, we'd been very chilled, absorbing different cultures, trying to process everything, had this sort of laid back lifestyle of, we don't know where we're going tomorrow, but that's fine, that kind of vibe. So I feel like living on the kind of slower paced lifestyle is something that we have really tried to bring to Australia, taking our time with certain things, not pressuring ourselves, and taking everything a step at a time. Miranda's book even talks about how stepping outside of your comfort zone can really show you what matters, essentially, and you start thinking about all the things that you really appreciate. I feel like traveling and pursuing new adventures is what will do it for you. Now, if your priorities are to get the best Instagram photos, for example, or social media videos, then I don't think you're going to embrace what's around you properly. For me, what I've realized is it's not all of the Instagram worthy moments that actually make the trip. It is all the chaotic things that are going on behind the scenes. There are going to be things like missed buses, language barriers, figuring out currency exchange rates every 5 seconds, negotiating at markets. You might even get food poisoning, like someone did. But this is what makes the moments, and I think the trip as a whole, so much more memorable. Like when Sam and I got stuck in Antigua, Guatemala, I mean, I don't want to say too much because next week's episode I'm going to be telling you all about Antigua, but let me just say that Sam and I got completely stranded in Antigua, Guatemala, to the point where I think we stayed an extra 3 days with no clue how to leave that town. I mean, we could not leave that town at all. And at the time, it really wasn't funny, but now it is extremely funny, and it was one of the really good stories that we were able to tell our families. Or even when we got a bus from Bolivia to Argentina, I had checked and it had said it was going to be a 4-hour journey. 10 hours later, we were still sitting on that bus, and I can tell you that wasn't funny either at the time. We kind of just ended up having to accept fate. Now we can laugh about it and say, gosh, that was a really funny story. We were very confused at the time. Actually, now I think about it, one of the times where we really had to embrace the chaos was when we were flying from Buenos Aires in Argentina to Ushuaia, which is the very, very bottom of Argentina. It's the most south that you can go. Closest point to Antarctica kind of thing. It was quite a long flight, about 4 hours, 3 hours. Not necessarily the cheapest flight either. And we turn up at 6 a.m. at the wrong airport. Think of it as like you were meant to go to Stansted and you turned up at Heathrow or Gatwick. The airport we were supposed to be at was on the complete other side of the city, and it was 6 a.m. People were starting to go to work. Traffic was starting to build up. We had about 30 minutes before our gate closed, and we had to completely speed our Uber driver and say, you have to drive as fast as possible. And that was incredibly stressful. But even sitting in that Uber on the way to the other airport, we were just sort of embracing the chaos, if I'm honest, because there's nothing we could do. We couldn't make the car go faster. We couldn't make the plane wait. We just had to see how it played out. And that was one of the funniest stories ever. For me, embracing the chaos, typically after, not during, is honestly just for good stories and funny moments. Like Miranda's book talks a lot about laughing at yourself, and it is the best thing you can do. It kind of just humanizes your trip. It shows you that everything isn't going to be all perfect, and not to sound too deep in a sense, but all of those issues and things that you have to overcome whilst you're traveling can be brought back to your everyday life. And it just shows you that life is not going to be one straight long road that is perfect. there are going to be obstacles in the way, but it's just about how you deal with it. And then obviously with the adrenaline and the heightened stress of traveling, especially if you're alone, I feel like it becomes more of an achievement that you've got yourself out a situation or you have sorted yourself out. You just become better at handling things, I feel, and you learn to essentially embrace the chaos. It's just finding the joy in all of the little things too, just like Florence's book talks about, and I guess it makes you live a bit more deliciously. Traveling and moving abroad are incredible ways for you to overcome fear and to gain confidence, learn to embrace chaos, challenge societal norms. But I feel like you also don't have to leave your own town or your city to do any of these things. It's about finding moments of courage, connection, and joy in your life. Please DM me with anything that you are going to do for yourself this week to live a bit more deliciously. This could be absolutely anything. Could be a dance break in your room. Maybe you go and sit in the park for a few hours just with nature. It could be having a really nice chat with a sibling or a family member. Or send me any stories where you're going to embrace the chaos, because I would love to hear them. So if you're halfway across the world or sitting at home, always remember, you are in charge of your life and you can make it as delicious as you want it to be. I'm being completely honest with you. I hope that you guys really enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe and like this episode of the podcast, and I'll see you next week. Bye.